Okay, so now we're at the stage where we're going to do some further refinements here on the baby. And now I'm just zooming in just quickly here on the baby's head. I'm just going to make some slight further adjustments to the shadows here on the baby. And I'm just going to bring those greens back a little in the shadows. And the yellows. So I'm actually going to add a little bit of red into the shadows, just like that. Yeah, so if I just turn that off and on, I'm probably more happy with that result at the moment than what it was before. I just felt like it was slightly too green in the shadows. So yeah, we will probably make some refinements during this process, and yeah, that's what we do. We kind of re-review, and we can go back and make changes if we feel necessary. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I want to actually add some shadow underneath the baby here, as though they're actually, you know, lying on the swing here. So to do that, we are just actually going to paint in the shadows just on a normal layer. So we're just going to close this group here, just this little arrow. We're going to move below the group here by clicking on this background layer, and I'm just going to create a new layer by clicking on this new layer icon, and that's going to create a layer underneath the subject layer. So the shadows that we want to paint under the baby need to match the background as much as possible. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to use our eyedropper tool by pressing the I key or just selecting your eyedropper tool. And we're just going to, on the background, just select an area of shadow that we are going to paint underneath the baby as a base. So I'm kind of looking in this area here. We'll probably go for, if I just check this one, like just color sample one of these shadowy areas here, like this one. And yeah, so we'll start painting with that, and if I need to adjust it, I will. The big thing is making sure the shadows not only match the background but also the baby. So we're just going to color sample, yeah, a shadow from here, just there. So once we've done that, we'll grab our brush tool by pressing B or selecting the brush tool, and just make sure we've got a soft brush selected. If you're using a mouse, you can change your opacity or flow. I think you'll need to change your opacity, and it just means you will be painting gently underneath the baby here. So I'm just going to, along the edge here, just start to paint in, like with the brush, just some shadows here along the, just gently, kind of just brushing along the edge here of the baby, just kind of covering those bright areas where the baby's meeting the ground here. So we're just kind of doing this gently. We're just kind of painting in just along here. The other thing with painting in shadows underneath, it helps a lot with making adjustments to the subject as well, because if things don't look right without, like if the subject's sitting in a scene without a shadow, it makes it a little bit harder to determine what needs to be added or not. So we need to just get all the elements kind of working together to look correct, as though the subject is actually sitting in the scene. So that color selection we made of the shadows here, and because of the adjustments we made before on the subject, I can see that there's not a harsh difference between between the shadows here on the subject and the shadows underneath, which is good. So I'm not too unhappy with that. That looks quite good. So yeah, we're just bearing in mind also the light is coming from here, so we I need to make sure that we are thinking about the light hitting behind the baby here and on top of the baby, and how the shadows may be cast here, and what kind of lighting is actually going to be passing past the baby's head here. You know, we don't want to go too high here with the shadows. I mean, you probably can, depending on what you want to achieve. But just in this example, I'm just going to go with my best judgment here and just make sure I'm kind of painting over that. Whoops. So that's already looking better. We've got a nice, if I just turn that layer on and off, you can see the difference visually with the shadow there under the baby. Yeah, we are. I think that's pretty good for now. I just, with the brush, I'm kind of just slightly adding more refinements here. Just making sure that where the utmost edge is here on the baby, we've got like the most amount of darkness, I suppose. And then it kind of we're just gently just tapering off that shadow under here, just to have it looking a little bit more seamless, just like that. So right now, if you're looking closely, depending on what you're working with as well, the edges will be harsh. We will refine the edges after we finish the lighting. We will soften the edges, match the edges as best we can, and yeah, it will be looking much better. So with that done, I'm just going to double click on this layer here on the name and just name that shadow, and that will be our base shadow layer. So for this example today, I don't think I want to take the shadows too much further. That might change depending on how I feel when we get to the end of the coloring. But right now, that level of shadow I'm quite happy with. I don't know if we need to go further with the shadows underneath the subject. That I'm quite happy with. So I'm just going to make a save of my document. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add some more lighting behind the baby here, like as though the light is actually hitting the subject from up here. So yeah, our job, like I mentioned earlier, is to make sure that the lighting on the subject is matching the lighting on the background. So to do that, we're going to go back to our subject group here, and on top I'm going to add another curves adjustment layer, and I'm going to hold Alt and I'm going to clip that to the top of the subject layer. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab the top slider here, and I'm just going to move the highlights slightly to the left, not too far, because you can see we're starting to get some information loss on the highlights. We're just kind of moving just a little bit higher to get a nice level of bright. It's not too harsh. And then I'm going to put another point here and just move the highlights just up a little more here. So I'm paying attention to the edge of the baby here and making sure that if the brightness, if it was really hitting the baby, how it would look. So we want to make it pretty bright, not overpowering, but pretty bright, because we want the edges here to match the lighting back here, basically. So I think right there is good for now. I'm going to add another point here on the shadows just to adjust the contrast on the shadows here just slightly. And we can change it if we need to. So just like that. So I'm going to rename this curves layer to highlights. And if you want to, I'm going to rename this base curves to base lighting. So if I just turn these layers off, you'll see we've just got this saturation adjustment that we made, the base lighting that we did, the color balance, which is the color, the recolor of the subject, and then the highlights layer. So this is obviously too bright, so we're actually going to paint in on the mask and paint in the areas of brightness that we want to have on the subject. So to do that, I'm just going to click on the layer mask of the highlights, and I'm going to invert that by pressing Control I, or you can go up to, if I can find it, I'm not sure where to find it up there, but if I just right click here. So I'm not sure exactly where the invert is, but I know the shortcut is on PC is Control I to invert the mask, or on Mac I believe it's Command I. Same shortcut. So the reason we are inverting the mask here is so that we can turn off the adjustments. See how it changes to black? So it's basically painted it all away. So the whites we paint on, the blacks means it's painted away, so that we can actually take our brush by pressing B with our soft brush, changing our foreground color to white, and see how we can just start to paint that light in on the subject. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. So with that mask inverted and our brush selected and our color set to white, paying attention to the lighting here, we're just going to gently, again, similar to what we did with the shadows, just start to paint in lighting here on the baby. So we're just thinking about where that lighting is hitting. Lighting will be hitting up here, like this. Just gently painting in lighting here on the subject. Just gently brushing in around these edges here where we might see some lighting. Now if I need to brush away, like if I've painted in too much lighting here, I just press X on my keyboard, or you press this arrow here, and you can swap between black and white if you're on your layer mask here. Just make sure you are working with the furthermost black in your color here. And we can just paint some, we can unpaint what we've done. So if it's too bright, we can paint some away. I'm kind of want to just make a slight adjustment to my curves here. So I'm just going to take the highlights down just slightly. Yeah, just slightly. It's not too bad. I just felt like it was a little bit bright, but it's actually not too bad. Yeah, just like that. So just clicking back on our layer mask, I'm just going to add some further lighting here. So what we're doing, yeah, we're just painting in the highlights. Then we're going to actually paint in some shadows just to get the best kind of match for the lighting. So that's basically what we're doing, is we're just manipulating the highlights and shadows on the subject just to match the lighting in the scene. So one thing I'm doing here is if I switch my color to white, painting on the highlights just like that. So that's pretty good. So if I paint quite harshly here, Just going to get my brush and invert. I'm just going to gently brush away some of that brightness there. And so where there is the lighting behind here, there's obviously going to be some shadows occurring on the baby here because the light is quite harsh. So I'm just going to paint underneath here where, like I'm using black, just paint away some of that lighting underneath where I feel like the light would be shaded by the baby's clothes, just here. Just to add in some extra dimension. So you'll see me switching between painting it on and off with the white and black here. So I'm basically just painting in the lighting. Whoops. Just going to add some refinement to my curves just to see if we can get a different kind of look here. Kind of feel like it maybe is too contrasty. I was kind of looking for like a glow, like a softer lighting here. Something's, yeah, more like this. I feel like that's a little bit better. Probably a little bit bright, but that's okay. So if we adjust the brightness in the shadows, just gives it a bit more softness. Yeah, that's not too bad. Just going to go back to my layer here and just paint away some of that. I feel like that lighting's a little bit harsh, and we can refine it afterwards. Just making my brush bigger here and just get a general kind of lighting on the subject here. Just painting some of that away here, just to add some more dimension to the subject lighting. And I'll probably just leave it there for now. We can refine it afterwards. So yeah, there we can see before and after on the highlights. And the edges here, they're not too much brighter than the background here. So we've got a nice kind of soft lighting applied on the top of the subject there. So once we've done that, we're going to add another curves adjustment layer. I'm going to clip it above the highlights, and we're going to rename that by double-clicking on it. Double-clicking on the words here to shadows. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add the shadows to the subject. So we can see we're going to need some slight shadows around the edge here where the baby's sitting on this ground, and just some shadows on different parts of the clothes just to add some more dimension, similar to the backdrop here. So we're just going to start by dragging the highlights down a little bit more, so we get a nice base level of shadow on the baby. So I'm going to zoom in here so we can see the shadows. So I'm actually going to, I can see where the change is occurring here between the shadows here and the shadows here. You'll see that it will meet the color level, and then it will go beyond too dark, like it's too dark, too bright. We're just going to get it to a range that's like, looks like it's matched well enough, just like that. And we can refine this further if we need to. So this is going to be our base shadow. I'm just going to leave some dynamics in here and just move that slightly. And I'm going to actually move that up slightly just to there. By adding this point here, I'm just like added a little bit more contrast. Yeah, I'm just going to leave that there. So that's the shadows for now. So same thing we did with the highlights. We're just going to click on this layer mask here and press Control I, or if you're on a Mac, it's Command I believe. And we're going to get our brush again with the white layer, white color, and we're going to just start painting in just around the edge here, just to add, just gently, just add some reflective shadow from where the baby is actually lying here. So I'm just going to soften that shadow up just by painting a little bit more around the edge here, just to get a nice base softness. Now once we've painted in along the edge of the baby here, we can actually re-refine the curves. So yeah, by adding a little bit more contrast, I can already see that I prefer it to be a bit more contrasted, just because of the way the background here is quite contrasty with the shadows and the lighting. I'm just going to add, by moving this point here, some more contrast into the baby on the shadows. Something like there. And I'm just moving this slightly, just there. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to go back to the layer mask. Let's get my brush again. I'm just going to start painting a little bit more shadows in. Now I'm actually going to invert the brush now by changing to black. Just going to slowly, gently paint away just a tiny bit of that shadow here. Some of it I feel like is a little bit harsh. The thing is because we're adding the lighting, we don't want it. We want the subject to look correct, but because this is a creative process, we don't want the subject to just be completely dark in the scene. We want to keep it as visible and dynamic as possible, while being as creative as possible. And we're just painting away just some of those, just gently, just painting away some of what the shadow that we painted in, just to make sure that the edges, like if I turn it on and off, the edges here have a nice shadow that matches where the edge is meeting the ground here. That's basically all we need to worry about, is that the shadows are like the reflective light from the ground looks correct. So I'm quite happy with the shadows that we've painted in just now. So what I'm going to do is, with the same shadow layer, I'm just going to start to add in a couple of areas of shadow where I think it would need it. So actually, because we're going to be making further adjustments, before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this shadow layer. So we're just going to actually rename this to base shadows, and I'm going to duplicate it by right clicking and duplicating. Base shadows copy is fine, and same thing, make sure it's clipped onto the subject. So we're going to right click on the layer mask and click on delete layer mask, And then we're going to click on this layer mask icon to create a new layer mask, and then we're going to again invert it. So it's basically just made a copy of that shadows that we created, and we've made a new shadows. So this is what we're going to call this. I'm just going to call it shadows 2, because we're going to paint in some additional shadows on the subject, and if we need to unpaint them, like if we paint in some shadows along some of the edges of the clothing here, and we need to remove it, we don't want to affect the base shadows that we've created. So I've just created, a duplicate of that so we can make individual adjustments and we don't affect the base shadows. So that's the reason for that. So we can see here, like in the original image of this baby, we've got shadows occurring here because of the way the image was, the lighting in the image. So because obviously we are compositing and this is a different scene, we want to actually just add shadows that match our scene. So we need to see the shadows here. We need to probably add some shadows here, because this being lit brighter here doesn't really make a lot of sense in this scene. So just adjustments like that we can see that we will just add. So I'll just gently paint in along the edge here just some extra shadows. And even if you feel like you need to add some extra shadows to the edges of the subject, you can do that too. So I'm going to swap between, by pressing X, I'm going to swap between these just to paint away some of what I've painted in, just to make sure that we're not going overboard and we're just keeping it quite soft, because this is a portrait after all and we want it to be soft and gentle lighting, just like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, no I'm not, I'm just going to quickly adjust this. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it how it is. And so I'm going to click back on my layer mask here, and again just painting in some areas here where there's too much brightness on the edge of the baby, where there could be some additional shadows. Like up here, just on here. Additional shadows, particularly here and along here. Just very gently. Make sure again, if you're using a mouse, you have your opacity turned down so you are not painting too strongly with every click. So I'm just painting in shadows in areas that I feel like the subject, see I've painted them in, and then I gently, very gently just paint them away. And again, I feel like this part is just quite bright. Just painting in some shadows in these areas where I feel like, along these crease lines particularly, where there would be a little more shadow, just along here. In here a little bit, just in here, some shadows in here. Shadows under here. So if we just see what we've done here, you can see we've added a little bit more dimension to the subject, making it feel a little bit more like it's actually in the scene here. So I feel like these shadows here are a little bit harsh, as much as they seem correct. I'm just gonna paint them away slightly. Yeah, more so like that. We're gonna try and avoid painting too many shadows on the baby's face, just because, it's portrait. We want it to stay as though we can see the baby's face. Just going to add some extra shadows in over here, just in areas where I feel like it's going to need, whoops, just a little bit extra in the shadow department. Just in here, just gently, just in here and here, just adding some more dimension and depth to the subject. Just paint some of that away. Alright, I think that's quite good. I'm just going to save my document, Control S, we'll go up to File, Save. And so now we have a little bit more dimension in our shadows here, which I think looks quite good. We will just get the lighting correct, like I mentioned before, and then we'll move into refining the edges. So I'm actually going to just have a look at how it looks reversed. Image, image rotation, flip canvas horizontal. So what flipping horizontally does is it makes your brain perceive the image, mirrored, and it may see lighting differently when you flip the image. A lot of illustrators will use this technique when they're drawing because it helps your brain to see lighting differently than you may not be able to have seen it correctly on the original orientation. So again, image rotation, flip horizontal, just so we can see how the lighting is looking. And like, I'm actually quite happy with this. Obviously this process, like I kind of touched on earlier, it's a highly creative process and it's a process of refinement. So we could refine further and further, getting the adjustments on the baby more and more detailed. But today, this is just an example of the principles of compositing and putting a subject into a scene. So already I'm actually quite happy with the work that we've done here. So if I just turn all these layers off, we can see what we've actually done. So we added our base lighting initially, and the skin was far too saturated. So we've turned the saturation down with that hue saturation. We then did the manual color matching based on the colors in the backdrop. We then added in some highlights where the lighting is actually hitting the subject. We then added some base shadows in around where the baby is actually meeting the swing here. And then we added in some further shadow refinements on the subject. So quite happy with that. I will actually, we could do one more lighting refinement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the adjustments layer icon and just add in another curves and clip it here. And I'm just going, this is basically just an experiment. I'm just going to see if we can reach a slightly more desirable result by just overall brightening the subject. So when I'm doing this, I'm using my navigator as well, just to reference how it looks as a thumbnail. It's different when your brain is looking at an image on a canvas that's quite large compared to when it's looking at it in a small thumbnail view. It just helps you perceive the lighting a bit better. So I think what we've done is good. It may actually be just slightly too dark. So I'm just going to add a little bit brightness here to overall. And I'm going to add another point here on the shadows and just see if we can get to a really nice looking result just as a final adjustment on the subject here. So I'm just kind of, I like that contrast and that contrasty brightness we're kind of adding to the subject here. So if I just zoom in, you can just see the shadows here. We pretty much had them correct. I wouldn't try refining further on the shadows. It will just introduce more issues, I would say. So yeah, a little bit brighter. I'm just going to invert it again. Image rotation, flip horizontal. I actually like what we did initially, and adding more brightness is probably unnecessary at this point. Highly subjective. So because I can't really decide, and I don't want to waste a lot of time, I'm just going to turn on this curves, and I'm just going to call this final curves. And we made some, all we did was slightly turned up the highlights and basically put a clip on the shadows. So you could just move the highlights, which creates more of a contrast effect on the subject. So because I can't really decide and I like what we did, I'm just going to adjust the opacity on this layer and see if we can just add a very gentle adjustment. So I reckon 35% is good. Actually, maybe even less, maybe just 20%. Yeah, I'm happy with that. We added 20%. So image rotation, flip horizontal, just to take it back to where we were. And right there, I think that pretty much does it for the compositing overview. So we've done all the base colors and lighting, and now we are going to move on to refining the edges of the subject.